Uh, Welcome all of our attendees to this Egypt French webinar. Our news now that regarding the IIRSM Risk Excellence Award for 2023, it is now the submission is closed and there is too many persons submitted already, and the results will be announced by the 5th of March. All our updates will be at the website, and you can go through, and also the event, you can go through and attend all the next events and trainings. For our presenter today, he's really a unique person. Andy, he's a fellow of IIRSM, and he's a CMI charter member in Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. He is also a member in the Institute of Industrial Accident Investigation. He's a member in the Institute of Leadership and Management. He had a vast experience in such area in accident investigation. He's already worked for some major companies in this, and he's also accredited as health and safety consultant with the UK Occupational Health and Safety Consultant Register. And in addition to all of this and his hard work, he also written a book on interview techniques to support managers and assist all of us to do our job in a proper way, investigative interviewing, a practical guide for manager. This is the name of the book. Really, I thank Andy very much for his support for Egypt chapter, and this is not his first, and I believe this is not his last also to be presenter with each chapter. The platform is yours, Andy, and thanks a lot for your time and efforts.
Okay. Thank you, Yasin. I appreciate the introduction. So welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming on to the webinar. What we're going to look at this evening is analysing investigative evidence. So what's all that about? Well, as you realize, any investigation can generate a lot of evidence, and that's going to come in a variety of formats. So the challenge that the investigator faces is how he analyzes that data properly and gets the full value out of it. And it can be a little overwhelming if you're not used to it. So what we're going to do in this webinar, we'll look at the different kinds of evidence, different categories, if you like, that you may need to deal with. And we'll also look at, in general, at some of the techniques that you can use to get the best out of the evidence which you've got. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's look at the investigator. What does he or she need to be a competent investigator? Well, the first thing is you've got to have an open mind. Now, what do we mean by that? We mean that you start any analysis or indeed any investigation from the viewpoint of going with the facts. What you do not want to do is to enter an investigation or an analysis with an idea in your mind of what's already happened or what you think didn't happen, because that's going to cloud your judgment. If you start out thinking you know what happened or you know what didn't happen, then, and you will not realize this is happening, you're going to try and interpret the evidence in such a way that it fits your opening ideas. There are things like anchor bias, which I think we mentioned on previous webinars, where you tend to start from a basis of the first evidence you get and everything matches into that evidence. You judge it against that particular piece of information. So you've got to keep the mind open all times. Take the evidence as it comes. The correct approach that you need to follow, the professional approach, is that you base your conclusions on what the evidence tells you, rather than what you'd like it to tell you. Now, you may find the evidence is embarrassing, or it may be surprising, or it may be something you don't want to hear, or it may be what you thought it was. But whatever, you go with the evidence. Don't try and bend it to suit your own ideas. And that can happen without even realizing it. You're starting to gently distort the evidence or twist it slightly to match what you think is the true story. The evidence is what you go by. So what you have to do, and this applies whether you're actually talking to somebody as part of the investigation or whether you look at the evidence you've gained, is you look at the fundamental questions. Who, what, where, when, and how. And the ultimate question is why? Why did it happen? Once you know why something happens, why there's an accident, you know why something went wrong, then you can take precautions to stop it happening again. And that, of course, is the fundamental point of any accident investigation. It is not, and I always say this on these webinars, it is not there to find somebody to blame. That's irrelevant. What you want to do is to find out what happened so you can stop somebody else being injured at a later date. Blame is a secondary issue. In fact, there are arguments, some authorities argue that blame actually doesn't really exist, human error. It's really a fault of the system, but we'll leave that for another webinar. So you want to find out the facts: who, what, where, when, how. Logical questions. And then the why, the most important question. Now, an open mind is critical because otherwise you're going to start distorting the evidence without even realizing it. But you also need to have both an eye for detail and, I phrased it here as a keen sense of curiosity. It's also known as being nosy and asking questions. You want to know what happened, why things were done, why they weren't done another way, what people were thinking. You want to get the information from them, but you keep an eye on the detail. And then you're asking questions like, does this actually make sense? The detail of what I'm seeing, does that match the story I'm being given? And where's the evidence to support this? I've been told that such and such a thing happened. How do I know? How do they know? Is it just an idea, or is there some hard evidence behind it? And if there is hard evidence, then maybe I should have a copy of that to go in the file. So you're constantly asking questions, and you never ever take things for granted. Always check, where is the evidence to back this up? Or are we just jumping to conclusions? Also, you need, and this is difficult because it affects your pride sometimes, but sometimes when you're looking at where's the evidence, where does it all make sense, you may realize actually it doesn't make sense, that you've gone off at a tangent, at an angle. And so you may have to sit down and think, hang on, let's get a fresh piece of paper and let's start again, because we've got it wrong somewhere and we're going off in the wrong direction. Things just don't add up at all. Let's go back, let's look at what we've got, let's start the analysis again with an open mind. It does take a certain amount of courage, is the wrong word, but you've got to have the belief in your own ability to go back and do that, accept that sometimes, being human, you will make a mistake. Recognize it, don't just carry on blindly. Well, I've started, so I'll finish. You don't want to start doing that. So how the investigator investigates is important. Let's turn now to look at the evidence. Now, yes, you can get an awful lot of evidence depending upon what happened, but broadly speaking, you can put the evidence into one of three categories. Now, sometimes there may be some overlap between them, but these are three broad categories of evidence to think about. So you've got physical evidence. So that from the incident scene itself, It's the sketches you take, the photographs, the drawings, the measurements. It's the things actually at the scene. If you take the classic example of somebody hit by a forklift truck in a warehouse, fine, then the forklift is part of the physical evidence. So where is it? What condition is it in? Which way are the wheels pointing? And so on. These all help to tell the story. So the physical evidence is important. It also makes the point why you should never disturb the accident scene, if at all possible. Obviously, if somebody's injured, you've got to get them out. If there are crates lying on top of them, you've got to take the crates off them. You can't leave them there. But where possible, disturb the physical evidence as little as possible. It can tell you a lot. Then you've got the documentary evidence, almost the follow-up evidence, if you like. And that comes from written sources, such as training records, maintenance logs, and you'd also include things like CCTV evidence in that. If the area is covered by CCTV, then you want a copy of the recording, and that would then go into your evidence file. So CCTV evidence is very useful. The last type of evidence is the witness evidence. So this is the evidence you collect from the people involved, from those who saw what happened, and sometimes people may be at a distance from the incident. For example, you may need a witness statement from a training officer to say, yeah, that is the training course that we put them through, that is the syllabus we work to, and so on. It all goes to put the jigsaw together. But these are going to be in the form of written statements. And so what you need to do is to log how you're taking these. They've got to be taken in the right format, in the right way. They need to be signed, and then they're stored as written statements, and they're stored securely. So there's the three categories that you're dealing with. You've got the physical, the documentary, and the witness. Now, if it's a large incident that you're dealing with, then you may have a team of investigators called in for this, and it makes sense that the lead investigator splits up these evidence classes. And so somebody will look at the physical, somebody will go and chase down the documentary, and somebody else will start taking the witness statements. And the sooner you take the witness statements, the better. Just as a side issue, never ever try and take witness statements from people in a group. Always take the witness statements individually, because sometimes people can be affected by what their colleagues are saying. Sometimes somebody's too shy or embarrassed to actually say what they're thinking, and so you're losing evidence. So always interview people individually, but try and get to them as soon as you can after the incident. The fresher their recollection, the better. So physical evidence, as I say, it's only of use if it's been collected properly. Go back to this forklift truck that always appears in accident scenarios. You've got a skid mark on the ground. Well, that's useful, but only if you can tie it into what else happened. Just having a photograph of a skid mark on its own means nothing. I mean, you should at least put a ruler by it and measure the length of the skid mark, but you need to know where it is in relation to the forklift truck. Is it actually relevant to what happened, or is it totally irrelevant? Just happened to be there, and then the accident happened later. So you've got to know where the mark is in relation to the forklift truck, to the casualty, to the racking, and all the rest of it, which is why you need photographs, sketch plans, and crucially, you need measurements. Remember, with the physical evidence, you've only got one shot at that. Once you release the scene to management, they can get on with doing the normal things. That scene is gone. You can never reconstruct it properly. So get what you can when you can. Get as much information out as you can because it may be a lot of it what you gather is not required, makes no difference. At least you've got it. It's better to have 12 pieces of information you don't need rather than miss the one piece that you do need. So get everything. Be a magpie. So the physical evidence not only tells you a lot about what actually happened, but you can also cross-reference that later on with documents, with witness statements, and so on. So you're looking for potential errors where people have got things wrong, they've made a mistake in their recollection, and it might open up further lines of inquiry. So it just depends what the evidence tells you. If, for example, the racking looks a little bit loose, then a further line of inquiry may be, when was the racking serviced last? When was it last inspected? May be irrelevant. You don't know till you ask the question. So the importance of the physical evidence and cross-referencing, again, that this forklift, let's assume that the driver said that the person appeared in front of him and he swerved to try and avoid them, but he couldn't, and he collided with them. Okay, fair enough. However, the photos which were taken at the scene immediately afterwards, they show something unusual. They show that the wheels on the forklift are not pointing straight ahead. Sorry, that they are, my mistake, that they are pointing straight ahead, right? So what does that mean? Well, that suggests that the vehicle wasn't actually turning when it stopped. Because had it been turning, the wheels would have been at an angle to the body, but they're not. So why aren't they at an angle? There's a line of inquiry. Now, it could be that the driver knows he caused the accident because he was going too fast or wasn't looking where he was going, and he's trying to lie his way out of it. Okay, that's a possibility, but it isn't the only answer. It may be that the driver actually believes that he did swerve. He knows so he's badly injured. He cannot believe he didn't swerve, because what he should have done. And he will convince himself, in all honesty, in all sincerity, yes, I swerved. In fact, he didn't. But he's not lying to you, and this is important. He's not lying to you. What he's saying is something he genuinely believes. Just the evidence doesn't back that up. Of course, another solution could be that, yes, he did turn, but the scene's been adjusted. Before you got there, somebody trying to be helpful has moved the forklift truck out of the way, and therefore you've lost that physical evidence now. You'll never know what angle the wheels were at when the truck came to a halt, because somebody's moved it. It's important to never disturb the scene if you can possibly avoid it. So that's a simple little example, but it does show that you've got to, don't take things at face value, ask the questions, and don't just assume, oh, well, the wheels are pointing straight ahead, therefore he didn't swerve, therefore it's his fault. You can't do that. You've got to analyze the evidence and look at all the different scenarios. Documentary evidence, as I say, it can come from a variety of sources. So it can be personal training records, results of safety inspections, walk-arounds, audit, manufacturer's handbooks on how the equipment should be used, maintenance records, and so on. And remember, also sometimes internal emails, memos, correspondence might also give an insight into what happened. So what you need to do is collect this information. Ideally, you want the original. So if you've got a maintenance report from the workshops on this forklift truck, you want to keep that copy, the original, to go into your files. But that may not be possible. For example, if it's an email regarding the maintenance which you want to record, all you can do is print a copy off, but make a note of when the email was sent, who it was from, who it went to, who took the copy when it was taken, and so on. So it's all documented. But where possible, you try and go for the original evidence if you can. If you're doing things like a copy of the manufacturer's handbook, they don't have a physical copy. You have to download it off the internet, and this is done more and more nowadays to save on printing costs and so on. You go on the internet and you download a copy of the manual. Make sure when you download a copy that you make a note of the date that you downloaded it, because it may be that at some point that handbook is revised and updated. So the one now on the website is not the copy that you've got. You've got a previous version. If you don't make a note of that when you're downloading it, then that could cause confusion later on. So the point being made here is that when you're collecting all this evidence, you have to be diligent and you have to take pains. Get the detail in everything. Do it slowly, do it logically, so you know if you need to, you can go back to any source, you know exactly where every piece of evidence came from. It could be useful to keep a log of what evidence you've got, a separate record, each one with a reference number, so you know if it's a large inquiry, especially a major incident, major accident, that you can go back into your files and you know in there you've got a statement from so and so, from the driver, there's a copy of the manufacturer's handbook, and you can find them all very easily, and you know who got them, where they were taken from, when, and by whom. So logging everything is important. You need to identify the evidence, as I say. What I used to do when I worked in law enforcement, standard practice was, if I was securing evidence at an incident, then I would simply initial it and with a number. So my initials are AJF. So the first document I picked up, for example, would be labeled AJF1. And in my notebook would be a note, AJF1, copy of invoice found at wherever. So everything ties back to everything else. You don't want to be in the position where you've got a piece of paper which is crucial, but you've got no idea where it came from. That's embarrassing, to say the least. You've got to keep track of everything. So you identify it properly, including its source, and you store it securely. Now, what I recommend is that the investigation team, especially for a major incident, they've got their own secure office, and there should be at least a secured filing cabinet to put the evidence into. So only the investigator or the investigation team have got a key to that cabinet, and you don't leave it unlocked. So it doesn't seem nice to think about it, but if somebody did want to tamper with the evidence or take something away because it was embarrassing in some way, then they can't, because you locked the cabinet. It's just thinking ahead of the game. Sometimes during the analysis, you might need to make notes about a document or to highlight a section. For example, a maintenance record, when was it last done, or what the recommended times are. You want to highlight that for reference quickly. Not a problem with doing that, but never ever do it on the original document. Simply make a photocopy of the document or the page or whatever, and then make a note on that and mark it working copy. So that's perfectly acceptable to do that, because you may have to cross-reference various things, but you don't want to adjust or in any way damage the original. The original as you found it should remain as you found it. Only put your notes on a working copy. And then finally, witness evidence. Now, as I say, it's normally documentary evidence. It's written, it's agreed, and it's signed. And the witness does not sign it until he's read it and agreed he's happy with the contents, because it's his statement. So he shouldn't write down what somebody's told him to write down. He gives his evidence, what he saw, what he heard, what he believed, what he did. That is all his evidence. In the English legal system, we refer to that as the person being able to speak to what is in his statement. He can speak to the fact that he spoke to the managing director. He can speak to the fact that he moved the forklift truck out the way, whatever. So it's a valuable piece of evidence. And the thing is, you can store that for later reference. Once it's been signed off, then you store it easily. And forgive my sense of humor, you can't store witnesses. It'd be nice to do it sometimes, but I don't think they'd like being locked up as a witness. So nice idea, but no, you've got to rely on that piece of paper. Sorry, it's my sense of humor. I just couldn't avoid using that photograph. I just had to do it. Okay, so we've got the evidence. So we thought about how the investigators got to think, open-minded, take everything as it comes, give it its full value. And they looked at where the evidence comes from, the physical, the documentary, and the witness statement. Okay, so we've now got a large box of evidence, or a filing cabinet full of it. The next challenge is to try and work out what it all means. Well, again, we can start to break things down a little bit, make it logical. So you can broadly classify an accident as being caused by one or possibly more of failures in the following areas. So there is some overlap sometimes, but these are a good starting point. So the method, were they using a safe working procedure or not? And that then opens a line of inquiry if they weren't. The material they were working with, whatever that was. So was it the correct equipment, the right tool, or were they using the wrong one? Was it the correct tool, but it failed in some way? If so, how? Or was it they simply hadn't got the right materials at all, they were just improvising? So why was that happening? The environment. So were the problems due to, for example, noise or poor visibility? Did the person not hear the warning because of background noise, machinery, and so on? Was it poor visibility? They couldn't see what was going on. Maybe it was raining heavily, or it was foggy, or middle of the night and there are no lights on. All these things to think about. The personnel. Was the employee, and that's all the employees involved, were they trained properly? Were they maybe distracted by something else going on? Were they having an argument maybe, or discussing a football match and just not watching what they were doing? Was somebody tired? You know, which then brings into question the shift system they're working maybe. Are they doing too much overtime? Is there enough rest periods between shift changeovers? Did that play a part in what happened? And fatigue is quite often a problem in driver accidents. The driver's fatigue slows down his reaction times. And then finally, we go to management. The last area, was supervision adequate? Were instructions clear? Now, people don't always need to be supervised. I mean, a lorry driver, for example, once they're deemed qualified and competent, then they go out on the road on their own. You don't send somebody to keep an eye on the driver. He's trusted to do it himself. So was he given adequate supervision before he went out? Were his instructions clear? Did he know what he was doing? Was he trained to handle equipment on the vehicle, like to run if it's a tipper truck, does he know how to use it properly? If it's got a crane on the back, does he know how to use that crane? Did he give the right instructions? So you look at the management side of things, and all these interact. Well, these are the main groupings that you can work from. And what you can do is to, again, you don't want to disturb the original evidence, but make working copies of the evidence and then split them up into these groups as appropriate. So that's giving you a starting point, getting some idea now of what was involved. If you've got no problems with the material, but you're worried about the method, then most of your evidence will be in the method section. So now you've got, say, as it were, 5 piles of paperwork to go through. So now you start to refine it a little bit more. Now, one technique for doing this is a Japanese technique called the Ishikawa diagram, which, as you'll realize when you see one, is called the fishbone diagram, and I'll show you why. There we go, looks like a fishbone. So the idea is that the main bones of the fish's skeleton, as it were, they represent the key areas like personnel, management, equipment. And then from those bones, smaller ones spread out, looking at the different things you're looking at. If it was, say, management, okay, then it's supervision, training, reports, briefing documents. All these come off the main bone, if you like. So you put the failures can go on there, and other comments go on the bones. It gives you a graphical summary of what's happened. But of course, what you've got there, in most cases, has yet to be proven. But it's giving you a sketch, if you like, a long time, against time, of what may well have happened in the incident. So if we look at one here, draw very briefly. So you've got the various lines here. These are the main areas: the equipment, the process, the people, material, environment management. So these are the main groups of evidence which you put together. And then each of these, you've got the smaller sidebars. So you've got materials, you've got the primary cause why it may have failed, and the secondary cause why that may have failed, and so on. So you can start to put the different pieces together in their appropriate place. And that will start to give you an idea of what has led in time to the problem, to the accident which you've got. So it's a useful technique. And I'm not saying any one particular technique is the one to use and don't use the others. It comes down to some extent to a matter of choice. What you find the more comfortable to work with, what works for you, what your background is. Maybe you've worked in, say, quality, so you're used to things like Ishikawa and so on. It's what works for you, as long as you get the right answer at the end of the day. These are just different tools, to use the management phrase. These are different tools to put in your toolbox. So Ishikawa is quite a good technique. It gives you a visual representation of what's involved, and then you can start to zone in on particular areas. Another way of doing it, and again, a very simple way, is to build a timeline. So just straightforward left to right chart, putting down what happened or what is believed to be happened, what you think might have happened, but you don't yet know. You can put these all down. So the point of doing this is that not only can you see discrepancies in information, there's a whole gap there. We don't know what happened between the hour of 12 and 12:30. What on earth was he doing? We've got no evidence whatsoever. And also you can see discrepancies where somebody says they're somewhere at 12:15, but according to the timeline at 12:15, somebody else saw him at the other side of the building. Now you've got a discrepancy. Again, it may not be that somebody's lying. It could simply be somebody's made a mistake. They've misread the time, or their watch is running fast or running slow. But it's a discrepancy which you have to work on. So what I put here is a very simple diagram of a timeline, which could form part of an overall timeline for an incident. I mean, you can break them up into little sections if you want, and then magnify them if that's helpful. But what we've got on the following example is a very basic timeline related to a vehicle accident where a truck has rolled away in the yard and hit somebody. And what we've got so far are the confirmed facts are in blue, and the uncertainties, the things you need to work on, are shown in red. So here we've got it. So what's happened? We know what time the truck arrived because that's logged in by the gate security. We know that happened, and we can double check that on CCTV. The supervisor, for some reason, wasn't supervising the truck's arrival because he was apparently on the phone, but we don't know yet, and we don't know when. in relation to the truck arrival. Was he on the phone before, during, or after? We don't know. That's got to be tightened up. At some point then, the driver goes across to the office. So the truck is parked up, he walks over to the office as normal. But when? We don't know. He's not certain. He just I parked the truck and I went over. So you need maybe to tighten that down. So again, CCTV may show him walking across the yard. With a bit of luck, the CCTV is time stamped. So we can turn that to a blue and put him at the right position on the timeline. Then at some point we know a truck rolled away. Now we don't know when, but that could be important. Because if, say, he'd forgotten to put the handbrake on at all, then you'd expect the truck would start to move fairly soon after he'd gone, as gravity took over. If, however, he parked on a slope and put the handbrake on and walked away, and then the handbrake failed, there could be a significant time lag between him going to the office and that truck starting to roll. So that gap between those two events could be significant. It's an indication, line of inquiry. You need the truck to be examined. Was there something wrong with the handbrake? Did it come off of its own accord? What we do know is when the truck collided with the forklift truck. We do know from the phone logs when the ambulance was called. And we do know from the email when the manager was told about it. So that is all tied together. There may be a question as to why there's a gap between the truck colliding and the ambulance being called, then the manager being advised. Why such a long gap? Is that significant, or is that just a break-in procedure? May not be relevant. But that gives you an idea of how even a simple incident, you can look at the diagram and think, the things we don't know. I mean, the truck arrived. Why did it take so long for the driver to go to the office? What was he doing? Was he on the phone maybe and being distracted by the phone call? He then jumped out. Oh, I've got to book in. I forgot to book in. So he's jumped out the truck and forgot to put the handbrake on. You don't know. But that timeline could be, where's he gone? There we go. That gap there, that might be significant or it might be routine. You don't know. But it gives you questions to ask and helps move the investigation along. Another technique which you can use is called mind mapping, and you can actually get software for doing this. When I was in law enforcement, I did actually do an intelligence analyst course, and we used a very upmarket version of mind mapping, which is a software program, which at the time, 10, 12 years ago, cost about £5,000, about $10,000 for a copy. It's very, very good, but you need to have a good case for using it. But mind mapping as it stands is a very simple technique. What you're doing is you're sketching out the links as you understand them between the data you've got, and you start to work out the links between the data. And you could in fact just do this on pencil, piece of paper, pencil, and just sketch out the links between what you know has happened and what you need to find out. So you get a better appreciation of the complexities, and you can start to identify links between elements which may not have been apparent. As you're sketching things out, you may find, for example, that the same person keeps cropping up in different statements. So what's his functioning, what's happened? Yeah, you can sketch it out, or you can use software. As I say, some of these programs are very expensive. Others you can get free downloads for the simple versions, and they're useful to analyze the evidence. And if you're going to use one, I'd suggest you keep a record of the sketches you come up with. It just shows how you conduct the investigation. But there's an example. This is a free version, I believe. So what you've got here, mind map guideline. So this would be the incident. Everything comes out from that incident. And then the main headings we've got in here, use, clarity, and so on. These will be renamed, but it would be equipment, personnel, methods, and so on. And then from each of those, you split out the areas you want to look at, the lines of inquiry. But you may find that some of them then start to come together. So that gives you, some people think visually, and I tend to do that. And it's very good sometimes to write it out and you say, hang on, I've missed something here. I've missed a whole section of this investigation, a whole block of questions we've got to ask here, which I've forgotten about. It tends to prompt the memory. And it can get you thinking, well, why is that over there? Do we get one of those coming up over here maybe? And if it does, why does it come up over here? What's the link between the two? And so on. It gets the thought process stimulated. You can also find the use of color can be helpful to break out different sections, as I've got here. It helps when you've got a large diagram to break it up into groups so you can recognize them easily. As I say, different people have got different techniques. Some people may not like using this because they prefer to write things down as text and move them around. What I prefer in courses now, I've got a new idea, I tend to use PowerPoint. And just very simple slides. There's no fancy formatting. Just simply jot the ideas down, and then with PowerPoint you can rearrange the slides very quickly. So I can arrange the running order and keep rearranging it without writing it. It's just drag and drop, and for me it helps. So that may be another way of doing it. Write everything down in PowerPoint and move all the slides around till the thing makes sense. So there are many ways of doing it, of analysing the evidence. But it's a matter of don't be overwhelmed by what you've got, just take it logically. So just to summarize, investigation is a mental process and a physical. Physical because you're there at the scene, you collect the evidence, you're talking to people, you take your measurements and so on. But it's also mental. You've got to be thinking about what you're doing. And if you haven't got the proper mindset, if you're not open-minded and inquisitive, and prepared to challenge what you're doing. Am I on the right lines with this? Or have I got something back to front and I'm now going off at a tangent? Unless you're prepared to do that, you're not going to get the truth from the evidence. And the key thing is, remember the need for what I call personal integrity. You go where the evidence takes you and not where you wanted to go, or maybe a manager would like it to go, because he doesn't want to be embarrassed. So he prefer you didn't mention something or you had a certain finding. You know, this is the real world. It happens. People's careers might be on the line. So there's a temptation sometimes, hopefully not all the time. It's not that. It doesn't happen very often. But somebody may be tempted to try and interfere with the investigation, to try and push it in the direction they want. You've got to stand up and say, no, this is what I found. This is what I'm saying. And remember, you're not looking to blame people. You're looking to find out what happened. The evidence, as was shown, it can come in many forms, but it's little use if you don't know where you got it from, and you can prove where it came from. And I say prove deliberately because if this action investigation does lead to some legal proceedings, whether that's enforcement action or whether there's a claim for compensation from an injured party, whatever, if it goes to court, then it's helpful to be able to say, yeah, here's the evidence, and I can show you where I got it from. It just puts you in a far better position rather than, well, yeah, I got a copy of that, no, but I don't know where it came from, but this is what it says. It doesn't have much standing in court doing that. So you not only make sure you get the proper evidence, but also keep records of where you got it from, how, when, and what you did with it. Analysing the evidence, the final stage, there's many different ways of doing it. It depends partly on how you feel, how you think. Some people think visually, some people don't. Some people like to stand up and walk around and talk it through themselves, other people don't. It's a matter of personal choice. But whatever you do depends upon the complexity and upon your personal preference. And it doesn't really matter. As long as ultimately you get to the truth, then that's the whole idea. If you've got to the truth of what happened, and where possible you can find out how to stop it happening again, then you've done your job as an investigator. How you got there is not quite that important. So, only a short presentation. We've covered a lot, but I hope you found it interesting. Of course, it's really back to the organisers, back to Julie. Anybody, any questions you want to answer before we close? And before I go, thank you for your attention. I've enjoyed doing it. So back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Andy, for another excellent presentation. I'm not sure which point this came in, but hopefully it'll ring a bell with you. What about 5? Why? How to decide the best method to a certain incident?
I don't quite follow that.
I think he might mean, how about a 5th choice? How to decide the best method for a certain incident. Does that not ring a bell? Perhaps Ahmed can give some clarification on that question.
Yeah, I don't.
It says, what about 5Y? How to decide the best method to a certain incident.
Oh, sorry. Yes, right. I'm with you now. Yeah,
The way I
5.
read it. Sorry, apologies. It's the way I read the question.
Yeah, it's a technique for analysing root cause. You ask the question why 5 times, basically. You know,
I see.
my car won't start. Why? Because the battery's flat. Why? Because it's not been serviced. Why? Because the company didn't bother. Why? Because the company haven't got the money. So the company's failing to have a budget means my car won't start. Yeah, it works as a system. It gives you an idea of what's going on. It's not foolproof by any means, but yet the 5 whys is accepted as if you like, as a first attempt at finding the root cause of an accident. It's certainly worth trying it, and then see, does that give any lines of inquiry that's worth following? Does that help at all with the incident you've got, or is it not really clarifying anything? But yeah, 5 whys works as a root cause investigation method. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Andy. With my poor asking of the question, Ahmed did
That's all right.
confirm it's the 5Y method. It's just the way I read it. We don't have any more questions at the moment. Yassine, do you have any questions for Andy? You're on. Oh yeah, you're
Thank
just
you.
unmuting.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Andy for his detailed and clear presentation and sharing his experience with us, and looking forward for more presentations from his side. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. No, my pleasure. I'm glad to help. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Andy,
Okay.
we've just had another question come in. If you have time.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is from Karam. If an incident happened with an employee who is serving last working day of his notice period under his current employment, and this incident resulted in 7 days of lost from work, how will we categorize this incident?
Oh,
That's an interesting one.
that's interesting. Well, under UK legislation, the reporting of accidents, the 5 day, 7 day, and so on, that's when an employee can't do his job. But he ceases to be an employee after 1 day. I would take a broad view and look at it. Well, he may not be able to work for me for more than 1 day because then he's finished. But is he able to start his new job straight away, or does that actually stop him? Has he effectively been stopped from working for anybody for over 7 days, for example? And if that is the case, then I treat it as a reportable accident.
Okay, thank you. The next one is more of a statement, but maybe you have a comment on it. So it just says tree analysis and predefined tree analysis techniques.
Yeah, as I said, there are many different ways of doing this. You can have the sort of top-down analysis, there's fault analysis, there's all different ways of doing it, and obviously we can't go through them all here. My feeling is every method has got its advantages and every method has got its disadvantages. And also you've got to be comfortable using it. Use any method you like, really, as long as you're happy that it's going to give you a reasonable outcome. So if you're challenged, you can justify why you did it that way. But if you're happier using one method as against another method, then so be it. There's no rule, as far as I'm aware, that says you have to do it this way. As long as you are approaching it open-minded, that you are collecting the evidence correctly, and you are analyzing it competently, giving it all due weight, and you reach the appropriate conclusions, then how you get there is probably slightly irrelevant. It's whatever you're more comfortable with, it will be my answer.
Great, thank you. Okay, that's all the questions for this evening. Andy, thank you so much for giving up your valuable time to present to the Egypt branch members tonight. Interesting as always. Doesn't matter how many times I hear you present, I always find your webinars interesting.
Oh,
I'd like
to
I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and just to remind everyone, the recording will be on the IIRSM YouTube channel probably in the next day or two, and your attendance certificates will come out this time tomorrow. So I'd like to wish Andy, Yassine and everyone attending a good evening. See you next time.
Thank you, my pleasure. Good night.
ايوه